All right. What is up, everybody? I am once again live here coming at you with another installment of Xenozoology. So, a big question that a lot of people have these days concerning extraterrestrials, with the Navy coming out and admitting they have confirmed footage of extraterrestrials doing, or pardon me, not extraterrestrials, but unidentified flying objects, or the new UAP term, which honestly, it's just pedantics at this point. We all know that at this point, these are anomalous flying objects that nobody can claim as being theirs using technology that, besides guys like Stephen Greer coming out with no evidence and saying belongs to military industrial contractors like Northrop Grumman, is in some ways claimed to be, if not necessarily, like I showed you guys earlier with NASA, not necessarily of extraterrestrial origin, but still of unknown origin. And that begs the question, what could it possibly be? Now, if y'all know your cartoon history, or rather, let me put this, if you know your history of Japanese animation, you'll know that there's a series that actually tackles the topic of extremely foreign alien life that's organized, it's intelligent, that has visited Earth in the past before humans were potentially even around, and that have various anomalous methods of reproduction that aren't fully well known and are capable of higher rational thought, but still are not carbon based life forms and do not have the same dynamics that human beings would have, like intelligent life like us would have. And I'm going to show you exactly who I'm talking about. So, thanks for enduring the horrific frames on my camera, but it's these guys. It's the Transformers. So, I'm going to get into these guys later though. I first want to explore the premise of, are Transformers alive? Because for a long time people have argued that Transformers are organisms just like you or I, even though in the early days they argue, oh, well, they just built the Transformer. They were mechanically constructed back in the early days. So they're technically just machines, but they clearly seem to have some sort of soul. So eventually they moved on to spark infusion, all that kind of stuff. But especially in the days of AI, like everybody's talking about what happens when an AI reaches general intelligence, and you got to think about, does it now become alive? Like, what makes something truly alive? Is it just the carbon based chemical reactions that sustain a creature's existence? Or is it something deeper, that simply the metabolic action that life undertakes does not necessarily define what life is? It's like defining a chair as something you sit on. That's not really telling us exactly what that chair has to be made of, or what the criteria basically is of the chair, beyond making humans adapt a certain posture and allowing them to hold that posture against gravity. Theoretically speaking, I can make a chair out of almost anything then. I could make a carved marble sphere. I could get a boulder and carve it into a shape where a human could sit down and be suspended, and voila, it's a chair. It's like a beanbag, a chair. I mean, it can make you adopt the posture, but maybe they say, oh, well, it has to have an upright back, and you add a little few conditions, and suddenly now you're being really precise, maybe overly precise, about what makes a chair. So now you have to invent other words to basically describe the same thing. So this is something we've run into biology, for example, as I've explained in my earlier critiques through history. There are a lot of debates over the species definition, and a lot of debates over whether viruses are considered alive, or even red blood cells and platelets, which are denucleated. Is a nucleus required to be alive? And I think a lot of biologists, and especially xenobiologists, have gotten caught up with the idea that life has to be something more than the fundamental principles of its function. And by that I mean, if it's animate, if it's moving of its own accord, if it's organized, and if it's capable of very basic criteria, you can say it's alive. It's something where, is reproduction absolutely necessary, for example? Can you say that an automaton is alive? Many people think that the inability to reproduce and manufacture more of itself is a criteria. But then you have to ask yourself, okay, what about barren organisms? What about hybrid organisms? Are they no longer alive just because they're sterile? But then people would argue, okay, well, they still have the mechanics for reproduction. The hybrids are not born without genitals. It's simply that their chromosomes are mismatched or something, or there's some quirk in the genetics or some rare recessive exists where it doesn't do what it needs to do. But otherwise, it would if it wasn't for these faults that were created through breaking its genome. So, fair enough. But it still begs the question, how specific do you have to get? So, does a robot count as a living thing? If the robot is autonomous, like if it doesn't require a human being to program all of its behavior beyond a certain point, if it's able to be fully autonomous to go out and, if like Boston Dynamics, like I'll show you Boston Dynamics in a minute, but if you have like Boston Dynamics and their little robot hound thing, and it learns how to forage and it learns to stay in the sun, like one of the Voyager rovers, or not Voyager, but one of the Mars rovers, like, is if I encountered that on a foreign planet, I would consider that proof of life. Either something built this thing, which is proof of life, or maybe the thing itself, if it's autonomous, if it knows to seek out the sun when it's getting low on power, or to hibernate in a place where the sun will hit it when it wakes up. Even just basic behaviors that, even if they're not programmed, are learned over time. It's going to be hard for me to think that a machine, like a learning machine that can adapt to its environment, isn't alive, because I think that adaptation probably is the biggest hallmark for a living organism. The ability to adapt oneself, and to incorporate oneself into a niche, to slot oneself into an ecosystem, the ecosystem itself being an emergent quality of creatures doing that. I think that's the quintessential diluted character of life on Earth. Yeah, there's proliferation, but a lot of that it's only possible because there is an ability for these animals to acquire enough nutrients and everything to reproduce. They have to have found their place within all of these other life forms doing the exact same thing, only differently. So I do think that Transformers, I'm going to cover them today. I think I'm going to cover a different fictional, because I've said that this is going to go a bunch of different directions, like artistically and have breakdowns. But what I'm seeing is, like, so many other people have done this kind of stuff. What I haven't seen people do is actually give decent breakdowns of stuff like this. The possibility that maybe life is going to imitate art, and to see where these merits actually lie. Like, how scientific could this be? And we're gonna see the Cybertronian theory, the Cybertronian hypothesis, how well that's going to hold water. So let's see. My internet still stroking out, so yeah, let's gonna hope that improves. But I'm gonna go forward with the first thing I want to cover. So this is from the same magazine. This is from the Smithsonian, and keep in mind these are from two different dates. One is from July 11th, 2020, and that's by Dirk Schulze Makuch. I don't know. Like, one is like Schulze, which is German. The Makuch, I don't know what that is. But anyway, that's Dirk. He has a interesting mustache, and that's June 11th of 2020. This was published, and the earlier article, this is by the same guy, published in 2013. So the same guy published this 7 years apart. So these are the same dude 7 years apart, and I'm gonna read the earliest one first. So this puts you in the mindset of where many of the scientists were at back in 2013, considering non-carbon based organisms. So, is silicon based life possible? As we look for biosignatures on other planets, we should guard against being too Earth centric. So, what's interesting about this is too Earth centric. It's because you can understand the spirit of this term and where it comes from, but what's impossible to do is actually conceptualize something that is not Earth centric. Because what other metric do you have for a living organism? It either comes from the planet Earth itself, because every fictionalization of a life form is ultimately representative of an animal that does exist or has once existed. There's not really a lot of body plans that you can play with that haven't appeared at some point in Earth's history. And I don't think people truly appreciate that. Like, no matter what kind of weird, wacky uh, DMT trip you go through, you're not going to imagine anything that's too far off from something that we've seen here on Earth. And whether we know about these creatures or not, I guarantee you there's not very many different body plans besides ones that just incorporate some Lovecraftian body horror that gets you too far away. But once you introduce the possibility of non-carbon based organisms, so silicon and carbon have very similar properties. They can both surround themselves with four hydrogens, and it's theorized that you could have hydrocarbons and different types of polymers that are based on silicon instead of carbon, that you could basically replace most of the carbon-based molecules in the body with silicon instead. But silicon and carbon aren't exactly the same, and it seems to be that carbon is just better at doing chemistry, I guess, the necessary biochemistry than silicon is in most experiments. And there, he's going to go over this, but it's still interesting to think about because there is the other possibility that it doesn't have to be silicon based life trying to do what carbon based life did, but rather it takes a completely different strategy concerning how an organism actually develops. So, is it going to go through this whole multicellular phase, etc., or is it possibly to have a silicon-based organism, or at least a non-carbon-based organism that could spawn from something like a machine? And if a self-learning machine learns to reiterate itself to the point where it gets biological, where it starts functioning as a biological organism, it is autonomous, it takes in energy or produces its own energy. Because remember, a life form doesn't have to necessarily have an outside energy source. So autonomy doesn't really need to include energy source because people think like, oh, I have to plug in my computer, so it's not an organism. An organism, the very definition of organism is that it has organ systems. It consists of inner working systems that are unable to be autonomous by themselves, but together can be autonomous. Autonomous isn't necessarily the ability to produce your own energy or to get energy, but just to somehow procure energy through the inner working of these systems, and that without that inner working system, there's no way that it can procure that energy and propagate itself. So machines, in my opinion, already kind of fill that definition because machines, by their very nature, are a sum of inner working parts. The distinction many people make between a machine and an organism is based on the very real and present dilemma that, well, one, these machines can't fully make themselves, they still rely on a living organism to design them, and two, that ultimately, when you have a something built like this, it doesn't have any basic prerogatives. It doesn't have any intrinsic urge or need to survive. If you leave a computer uncharged, it's not going to try to crawl its way to a charger, nor will a machine necessarily express any general functionality outside of what it's basically programmed to do. We don't see this with life forms who are highly reactive to stimulus, even when they're as small as bacteria. Viruses react to stimulus, and we don't know how they do it. It's like to most scientists, all they see is a clump of, it's like a protein sheath and some RNA and some surface antigens and not much else. And yet these viruses, despite not being alive, are able to react in real time, observably, to biological signatures. So there's a lot of mystery out there concerning what actually makes a life form. But oof, bro, my throat is as dry as a Popeye's biscuit. I've just been through the ringer. I don't know if it's like the air. I did take a shower today, so my sinuses have been kind of crushed ever since. But I'm gonna get into this article now. That was a lot of preamble, but I mean, come on, bro. We out here, we out here rambling. Okay, so he says many of the space missions we send to Mars and other planets search for evidence of life, or rather, they search for life as we know it. Life that is made of carbon, requires liquid water, and uses light or chemical energy as a main energy source. So this is what he says as quote unquote life as we know it. So again, carbon requires liquid water or a source of hydrogen and oxygen. So that's why that is, because wherever you find water, water is basically how it's basically how oxygen, besides forming oxides with carbon or metals, this is usually what it'll turn into when hydrogen is present. So if oxygen and hydrogen are together, the activation energy to get them to combust means that in a single lightning strike, basically, you're going to cause a massive chain reaction that causes a large amount of water to form. And this is typically happening early in a planet's history. And what I find really funny about the people who think that all of our water came from outer space, like comets, I have to remind them, look, when you look in the early galaxy, you say like, oh, all this hydrogen and stuff gets blown out to the farther orbits and doesn't stay in the center. And I point out that's not true because we see from other stars in other systems now, thanks to Hubble and James Webb, Northrop Grumman coming out. When they're not bombing Yemeni tribal weddings, they're actually doing a really good job at being able to look at space. But I digress. The reality is that our earlier assumptions about the universe are no longer true. Gas giants can form very close to their host stars. There's nothing about solar winds that's blowing hydrogen away to the far edges of our galaxy. It's just that most of the hydrogen in Earth's atmosphere early in its formation became water. That is something people say, like, oh, well, oxygen itself is absent. It was only CO2. And I point out again, oxygen is very reactive. Oxygen is actually one of the most reactive elements in nature. It very quickly oxidizes iron and or forms oxides with iron, and it also creates water when it combusts with hydrogen. And so in a single lightning storm on an early Earth, which again, because of how much energy there was in the system back then, the Earth was basically a giant boiling bubble of rock that just became bigger and bigger and bigger over time, according to modern scientists and physicists. But a large amount of that accretion disk was also saturated with hydrogen. That's the main ingredient that stars use to produce heat and light. So what had happened was, Your Honor, is that basically the entire galaxy consolidated from this accretion disk of dust that was circling around the early proto sun. Some, what do they say, like 7 billion years ago? They don't know how old the universe is or the galaxy or our sun or anything. But they said once that formed, most of the hydrogen, they say it got blown out and there was no oxygen. But I have to point out again, most of that oxygen reacted with hydrogen and iron. So when you look at other planets, if you don't have carbon, like carbon is one of the most common things that a star starts to produce once it starts running low on hydrogen, once it starts combining hydrogen and helium or helium and helium, you're going to start getting elements like carbon getting made. So carbon is one of the more common elements in the universe. And that's why there's this slight bias towards carbon concerning how our biology is made. So the reason he's trying to say like don't be too earth centric is because carbon is just like the no brainer choice. It was just better in silicon and more abundant, um, or at least readily abundant for life to utilize. It wasn't put into like literal sand and rocks. The carbon was pretty readily available in the form of carbon dioxide. So instead of having to break down rock, you can break down gas instead. And many organisms, of course, favored that because unless you have some sort of free floating silicon, you're not going to have organisms that try to gain silicon through diffusion like organisms gain carbon. Because we think of carbon as this dark charcoal like substance. But remember, the vast majority of carbon on this planet is, well, I guess at this point, sequestered underground in the form of that carbon. So touche me. But most of it is literally gas in the air. And that's kind of miraculous that plants can take water and they can take the air you breathe, like a small amount of the air you breathe, like 0.4% of the air you breathe, and a handful of little nutrients here and there, like little tiny minerals and some little, I mean, they don't get nitrogen from the air, but still they use nitrogen and they produce sugars and they produce all kinds of fibers and all kinds of medicines. It's kind of incredible when you think about what plants are able to do with seemingly so little. But silicon doesn't do that. And unless you're on a planet with super high temperatures like a boiling rock like early Earth, I just don't see silicon being available the same way for biological organisms. It takes so much energy to break down silicon into a usable nutrient, into a usable building block. So my take on it is that silicon life, if it does exist, it would have to take on a form or go down a path that wasn't like a membrane bound cytoplasmic water-based carbon organism. It has to go down something different because I don't see a silicon-based organism forming around a thermal vent using conventional methods of what we think about. Because is it possible for a life form to form in a super super duper hot heated environment? Sure, sure, it's entirely possible. And if it's like a silicon-based organism that expands just by crystallizing something, it's just like a coral or just like a tiny little polyp that just builds a silicate structure from some semi-cool magma in some far-off galaxy. Maybe those exist. We don't really know what non-Earth-based life actually looks like. So that's what's really difficult to answer is would silicon-based life actually mimic carbon-based life, or are the confines of silicon, the fact that it does have a higher heat tolerance, give it completely different properties? Is there something more to silicon that makes it either completely incompatible with an organism, or is it just really unlikely to ever form? Because again, these guys don't believe in panspermia. Most of these guys believe in evolution. They believe in abiogenesis, that life randomly appeared and that it shapeshifted into all the forms we see today. So remember these, I don't know his specific beliefs, but I almost guarantee that he's an evolutionist. I have like a sixth sense because anybody, the most of the people who believe in like the silicon based life stuff, I've noticed that a large percent of them are pretty militant atheists. They're not really the type of people who are very open minded to alternative stuff. Ironically, you'd think that people who are looking into silicon based life wouldn't be super dogmatic about stuff, but they pretty much are because their main goal is to establish some sort of correlation or just normalize the idea that life can spontaneously generate. It's something where it's like, oh, well, if we can try to create a silicon based organism, then it's proof that we could create a carbon based organism. If that's the case, then we can calculate that nature could do the same thing if I follow these exact steps. They want to create life intelligently to prove that it was created randomly. So we're in a weird place in science. If you haven't been watching me, that's basically the gist of everything I do here. So this is his definition. It's made of carbon, requires liquid water, and uses light or chemical energy as a main energy source. So her colleagues from MIT, William Baines and Renwu Hu, Renwu Hu, like the Who's from Whoville, Renyu Hu, want to expand this quote Earth-centric approach. They suggest looking for any gas that is out of equilibrium as a possible signature of life on exoplanets. We say quote possible because geological processes, particularly volcanic eruptions, can also affect the equilibrium. On Earth, the out of equilibrium gases oxygen and methane are a biosignature. If they were not constantly replenished by life processes, plants that produce oxygen and bacteria that produce methane, the two gases would react to produce the relatively inert gas carbon dioxide. So, although oxygen oftentimes will react to rocks, so it'll oxidize minerals and therefore get trapped in minerals, most of the time, carbon is getting reduced or reacted into a gaseous form. And on colder planets, that gaseous form consolidates into an ice. So it typically is still going to be found on the surface. Most of the carbon on the planet is going to be found at or near the surface of the planet, just because it's such a light element. So Seeger and colleagues built a model that predicts how elements might combine naturally in the atmosphere of other planets. By comparing the model to actual observations of exoplanet atmospheres, the presence of life might be revealed. For example, for planets with atmospheres dominated by hydrogen, the model predicts that methyl chloride, dimethyl sulfide, and nitrous oxide could indicate the presence of life. Researchers are hoping that the James Webb Telescope, due to launch in 2018, will be able to detect biosignatures such as these. So, as you know, the James Webb has been launched, and it's crazy. It's been 5 years. It feels like it's only been around for 6 months. It really hasn't. It sounds really messed up to say this, but I don't feel like it's been worth the amount of money that the U.S. taxpayer paid for it. I can't lie. It just doesn't. It's a bunch of really touched up photographs cartoon balls from space and a little bit of exoplanet interestingness. I'm like, why do we have this thing, man? So I don't know. I guess forward march of science and all that. It would be extremely. So he says it would be extremely Earth-centric to presume that biochemistry on a planet is one way life can operate. But just how different can it be? One extreme are the Horta, the silicon-based life portrayed in Star Trek. Could we expect organisms? Okay, I'm gonna actually go over here, and because he mentions this now, the Horta here in this page. So the same guy, like we fast forward 7 years, dude hasn't aged. Well, it's his profile picture, so clearly. So in the new paper published in Journal Life, Janusz Petkovsky, and co-authors from Department of Earth, Atmospheric and Planetary Sciences at MIT tackle a subject familiar to many science fiction aficionados. Could there be life based on silicon rather than carbon? Who could forget the memorable Horta from the famous Star Trek episode? So they say, okay, so they put together a very elaborate treatise, whatever, must read if you're into ideas about extreme life, radical life. So extreme life, I like his wording. Not only do they provide a comparison of the chemical reactivity of carbon and silicon, they offer many amazing examples of how silicon is used by life on Earth and what type of silicon compounds exist in our own environment. So yeah, it's also because carbon reacted to silicon. Exactly. So they do mention that the reactivity threshold of silicon is sufficient for life basically to use it as a building block. But again, can you make a protein out of silicon? That's the $1 million question, because even though we say that, okay, life is based on the codon, it's based off the amino acid chain and all this, are you really able to build functioning proteins and enzymes that can do the job of a carbon strand? If you take the backbone of any amino acid and you see, okay, you need nitrogen, you need carbon, you need hydrogen. Is it possible to get enough silicon that's readily available, like CO2 is available? One of the most abundant molecules in the universe is carbon dioxide, and always comes in a relatively stable and easy to break apart form, versus silicon, which almost always, unless you're on a super hot planet, comes in the form of rocks. It's just they have really different chemical properties. So he says this. So not only do they provide a comparison of the chemical reactivity of carbon and silicon, they offer many amazing examples of how silicon is used by life on Earth, what type of silicon compounds exist in our own environment. So what's their verdict about whether Hortas or other silicon-based beings are possible? To make a long story short, it does not look very good. So yeah, the dude basically in a nutshell comes out and tells us it's not looking very good, boyos. And why is that? Well, DZ covered it perfectly. Carbon is, at the end of the day, just better. It's like Chad Carbon versus virgin silicon. It honestly is. It is like the Chad Virgin meme. Silicon is just it just doesn't have it. It's like that commercial, like the hefty bag commercial, like wimpy wimpy wimpy, and then carbon comes in, and it's like hefty hefty hefty, and you just it just doesn't. You use Occam's razor. You kind of just look at things from a purely logical perspective, and there's just not really many scenarios where carbon is going to be so scarce that it's going to be outdone by silicon. So there aren't many organic silicon compounds to begin with, and silicon-based life in water or an oxygen-rich planet would be all but impossible, as any free silicon would react quickly and furiously to form silicate rock. So even though that's pretty dope, again, once it's in rock form, guys, in order to break down rock, because it has very strong bonds, it's a solid, so you basically have to break that bond chemically, almost guaranteed, and chemically breaking that bond takes a huge amount of energy. The metabolic strain on the organism to break down rock is immense. That's why typically if you have an organism that is chemotrophic, almost inevitably it's going to be able to do that chemotrophic activity by relying on bacteria. It's almost always going to use synergy, because trying to dedicate that much biological machinery to breaking down rock, which is called lithivory or lithophagy, it's really difficult. I mean, CO2 is a carbon and two oxygens, where silicate rocks are are rocks, guys. Like, one is a gas that you can naturally diffuse and break apart fairly easily to use in whatever reactions you need, and the other is like a literal rock that you need to, like, maybe if you had a lot of acid in your organelles or something and you could break it down with like lysomes. It's just not logical. It just doesn't make any sense. Even in frozen form, CO2 would be more energetically, I guess, just manageable, just energetically possible. And he says that's pretty much the end of the story. I mean, he basically wraps it up like that. It's just, if you're in water, I guess the one scenario where it does work and what he's kind of overlooked is, again, the super hot planet. Because there is a point when you get to a certain heat where silicon actually is better for forming compounds. And that's where I'm about to come with these transformers coming at you hot. Because I think if any series is correct about what a silicon-based or non-carbon-based organism looks like, it's going to be transformers. And we see from the history, so I'm on tfwiki.net. So this is Transformers Wiki. So it says on their reproduction that the reproduction has transformed over the years, just like the actual creatures themselves. But we're going to go over basically why transformers are organisms considered living things and not just mere machines. So the wiki says this: though their bodies may let me retry that one more time. Okay. Though their bodies may be mechanical, transformers are at heart living beings. So right off the bat in the wiki, this is immediately what they say. So though their bodies may be mechanical, transformers are at heart living beings, and like all creatures, Cybertronians also create new members of their species. But while organic life forms procreate through a comparatively quick, self-contained, and straightforward procedure, Cybertronian reproduction is a complicated affair. The vast majority of Cybertronians reproduce asexually, but how exactly a new transformer is created, given life, and introduced to the world is a complicated process, a process that often plays a key role in the origin of their species and culture, even if the individual methods of reproduction often vary wildly across different continuity families. So, as this quote is, this is the only one method of creating new transformers. There are others, says Bob Budiansky. So we look at what looks like 1, 2, 3, 4-ish methods of reproduction, or I guess 6 methods of reproduction. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 methods of reproduction. My let me see. My assumption that it was that there was also one more, but I think it's covered in Spark and Fusion. Let me see where we're at. So I want to see if this guy included in this 2020. So he says Titan, which contains more carbon than oxygen, is closer as warranted. But I don't know if there's any planets. Look for alternative solvents for silicon, including low temperature cryosolvents like liquid nitrogen. It's difficult to dissolve any compounds at these temperatures. And I like I told you last time, you have to have a certain activation energy to make chemicals react in our universe. Just being like, oh, well, it's a colder planet. It doesn't change the laws of physics. It's incredibly unlikely that life will ever emerge on a frozen planet, simply because you need some minimum level of free energy in a system to do any sort of reactions. It's just not going to happen, especially if you think it's just going to spawn out of nowhere. So he says this. So Shapiro's, lavobes, and magmobes. So this is what I was looking for. So hypothesized microbes living in silicate rocks above a rock's melting temperature. But Petkovsky doesn't think that would work chemically. The strong silicon-oxygen bonds would break at about the same time. The COROT7b may be an ideal world for testing this hypothesis, as the authors, but Earth is nearly as good, and no one has ever found remnants or fossils of these hypothesized microbes in silicate rocks on our own planet. Yeah, so it just says the building block. So the chances of it being the major building block for life here or elsewhere seems to be low. What about its role in jump-starting life, though? It's hard to say that silicate anything is just gonna it just doesn't form the same compounds. There is a major difference. It's not just the ability to surround yourself with four hydrogens, it's also the ability to form and interact with other elements the same exact way. And that's just not what silicon does. So maybe, just maybe, life is full of surprises. But I think that if there is silicate based life in any form, then it would have to be like the Transformers. So here we go. Mechanical construction. So in the very earliest days of the Transformers franchise, before the franchise established the more supernatural aspects of Cybertronian biology, early fictional portrayals treated the Transformers like conventional, albeit highly sophisticated robots. With the right parts of technical knowledge, anyone could simply build a new Transformer like an ordinary machine. Once built, this new Transformer simply springs to life, a super intelligent, a sentient and fully functioning individual. In the original Transformers cartoon, Wheeljack and company created the Dinobots this way. The Constructicons rebuilt the human city into Trypticon, and the temporarily super intelligent Grimlock created the Technobots. So in this one, it's basically like that movie. I think the movie itself was called Robots, and they essentially did that exact same thing where it's like you self-assembled your offspring, like you ordered your offspring in a box, and you just like built it out of the box. And I'm thinking that that's basically what happened here, but that didn't really last for long because eventually they included the spark. So in order to have the spark of sentience, basically, you needed a literal like spark, and they did this in the Transformers movie with the All Spark, which was a huge thing about like Metatron's cube. It was some huge Gnostic Nephilim tier war in heaven fever dream that got made into a Transformers movie. But what's crazy about the Allspark is you could use the Allspark on machines, any machine, like that vending machine that got turned into a transformer. You could turn any human made vehicle into a transformer simply by touching it with the Allspark. And something about that Allspark was able to fundamentally rearrange the machine to become a transformer, which is insane. And that's something that is canon, is actually canon. The Allspark is actually canon, but it isn't the only way Transformers can reproduce. So it seems like Transformers as a species, as a society, aren't locked into just one method of reproduction. Just like how some animals can, like a Komodo dragon, can sexually reproduce. It can also asexually reproduce. It can reproduce by parthenogenesis, or like I don't know, other species of animals that like worms, like you could see like just regular old ground worms, like they can reproduce sexually, or they can reproduce by getting cut in half and then regenerating their body parts. Same thing, they both have an asexual and sexual form of reproduction. But Transformers, because they're not bound to conventional gender, or rather, let me rephrase that, they're not bound by traditional sexual polarities like humans are, male and female. There's no third gender, like there's no like third sex with any organism on this earth. The closest you can get is to these, I guess, parasitic organism, these parasitoids, which like parasitoid wasps, they are basically like, I don't know, they're like the xenomorphs where they just like gouge their ovipositor, because the stinger of any ant or bee or hymenopteron is an ovipositor. And these females, they use their stinger, which is their ovipositor, and they get underneath the carapace, the exoskeleton of the spider, and through their stinger they release a venom, and that venom is like and before the eggs come through, that venom paralyzes the spider, and then it lays its eggs underneath the exoskeleton of the spider. Then it drags the spider underground, and then its larvae hatch in the abdomen and then eat the spider from the inside out. And these parasitoids will do it to everything from caterpillars to grasshoppers. So there's a large amount of variety amongst them, but that's the closest thing you can get to a third gender, because technically now you need three different organisms to actually engage reproductions. So they're like the puppeteers, or what are they called? The Pearson's puppeteers from what is it? What is that? Ringworld? Is that Larry Niven? Yeah, I think it's yeah, I think it's the Ringworld series. But anyway, or Protector. No, Protector was the people turning into it's like you got a certain age and then you ate a fruit, like you were compelled to eat a fruit, and it turned you into this weird golem thing, and you just protected your bloodline. And if your bloodline ever died out, then you like got depression and died. It's weird, but anyway, at least in Transformers, they're not bound to such limited constrictions. There's no sexual dimorphism beyond anything superficial, but there does seem to be, I guess, implied sexual reproduction, but nothing explicitly canon because, again, as they mentioned, Transformers is mostly for kids. And unlike, shows made in 2023, they're not going to talk about sexual anything to kids back in these days. But there is like male and female looking robots, but there's no actual true gender distinction. So they built the Dinobots, like people remember they built the Dinobots, but then there's a discussion of, okay, well, the Dinobots, they're clearly not all there either. It's not like they are the same as these other Transformers. There's something more sophisticated about the baseline characters compared to the seemingly feral and animalistic Dinobots. And that's what kind of led to the spark infusion idea. The idea that they needed some other additive ingredient to become sentient organisms that aren't just simple automatons. Like I say, not simple automatons, rather fully sentient beings. So it was Marvel. So both the Marvel comic and the cartoon would separately explain the creation of Transformer and entailed infusing their physical form with a guiding, animating life force. So the Beast Wars cartoon eventually dubbed this life force a spark, and still later fiction revealed the sparks generally came from a supernatural artifact capable of imbuing new Transformers with life. That's the Allspark. So in Marvel comic, this artifact was called the Creation Matrix, and its primal program, conceptual forerunner of the later Matrix of Leadership. Concurrently, the cartoon introduced the omniscient supercomputer Vector Sigma, which turned Megatron's transforming but non-sentient robots into the Stunticons. Can we just take a minute and like just the biggest L ever? Literally called the Stunticons, bro. Group of 5 rebellious Decepticon automobiles that Megatron could barely control. They were like, it was like these guys were like the most edgy. I don't know how to explain it. They were like they were just super edgy for no reason. They're like, oh yeah, it's like we're gonna do a sick backflip and commit war crimes. And I don't know what, like, I don't know what the Stunticons. I don't know what the Stunticons are on about. Like, I don't know. They were extra. Stunticons are out here, bro. But big shout out to the Stunticons, bro. Probably the best thing to come out like out of the old Transformers series with these guys. So after the release of both Beast Wars and sequel Beast Machines, later stories set in the Generation 1 continuity family would essentially retcon that both the Matrix and Vector Sigma were creating new sparks whenever they brought Transformers to life. Soon, in the 2007 Transformers film, introduced the Allspark, co-opting the name of the Transformer Afterlife given in the Beast Machines, the metaphysical realm from which all sparks were generated and returned after death, as an artifact with similar life-giving properties which carried over into that year's Transformers animated cartoon. Much like Vector Sigma, both animated and live-action film depicted the artifact with life-giving powers, but even more pronounced, the Allspark can infuse any machine with a spark and spontaneously bring it to life. The results can range from articulate, fully sentient Transformers to animalistic creatures collectively known as Allspark mutations. In rare circumstances, exotic substances like energon can have a similar effect on mundane objects. In various Spotbot tribes, for example, the products of energon radiation infusing everyday objects in a human shopping mall with Cybertronian robot forms. In a similar vein, agglomulus energy displayed the ability to evolve normal organic organisms into maximals and predacons. And what's crazy about they don't actually show them, which is annoying. So there's something about energon. So energon is worth exploring because that seems to be the ultimate source of energy for all Transformers, and there is no reason to think that the Allspark itself doesn't derive its energy from Energon. So because Energon is known, it's canon that Energon is the main energy source in the universe besides this Ngalamis or divine energy. So it says that this is divine energy derived from the life force of an ancient energy being known as the Oracle. It's a powerful energy source that oftentimes has completely unrandom and unpredictable effects on whatever it comes in contact with. It can upgrade a transformer and give them new bodies, or it can lift mountains and freeze planets. So it's influenced by the spiritual alignment of the universe, dividing the energy into good and evil variants. So as we can see, this is tied to life force. Like there's something about this energy that is tied to Energon. So the blood of Unicron was often compared by fans to Aglamal energy. And there's this very interesting parallel between Dark Energon and Angulmalus energy, to where the point you could basically say they're the same thing. Dubbed Dark Energon. So Hasbro revealed their aligned continuity family where the blood of Unicron has become a key factor. Dubbed Dark Energon, the substance bore particular similarity in concept to both Anglamois energy and Dark Essence, right down to Dark Energon being hidden deep within the Earth, no less, which the fans were very quick to notice. However, when asked directly about the BotCon 2011, the creators of both Aligned Lore and Prime Cartoon revealed that the similarities have been completely coincidental. So he says it's coincidental. Nevertheless, fans who were in the know proceeded to equate Dark Energon with Aglamar energy. So it's basically, yeah. So here, this confluence of the three about the fandom would continue in the late 2010s, when a new round of retcons would ultimately turn people's understanding of Aglamar energy completely on its head. So now they're calling it something called Gaia energy. So they've basically distinguished it, so that now it's the notion of Anglamar energy being the life energy of Earth. So this is the life energy of carbon-based life. But for the Transformers now, that means that the only other choice that you have is Energon. And if we look at Energon, we see that its energetic properties are found in crystal or gas and in a raw form. So we see that this is a possible state in which a silicate-based organism could actually derive energy. If they can chemotrophically metabolize something that gives them more energy back, then they're not going to need something like, I don't know, sugars or ATP. They can use something else which provides them a large amount of free energy by simple metabolic processes. So we don't know if these are possible or not. So Transformers also have gods, Unicron and Primus, which are made by the One. Yeah, and the Dark Energon in the blood of Unicron is basically where, at least for me, I remember thinking that Dark Energon and this Aglamois energy were the same thing. In fact, I didn't even know what Aglamois energy was. I only ever heard of the two Energons. That's how much I just never knew that they were even a distinct thing. So I think there's one species of hornet that has one of the larvae unable to mature into adulthood. Its role is to protect the other larvae until they mature. Yeah, and that's so some animals can display preferential pedomorphisms. So in naked mole rats, they actively inhibit the growth of their daughters so that the queen is the largest member of the colony, for example. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Like animal life is extremely variable. And you actually see this even when Transformers, like which Transformers turn into sentient beings and which ones just remain bestial and to the whim of others. It seems like there's certain Transformers that are specifically made, like Rumble, which have some degree of sentience, but are ultimately designed for a role that's much more subservient to others. So there's like this weird amount of eusociality when it comes to Transformers. On one hand, Decepticons and Autobots are just two different factions, but they operate essentially like two different ant colonies. They don't really act like two warring nations. They act like, well, I guess like you would expect space robots to act like. I mean, they're alien robots. So you're going to have a large amount of drones, you're going to have a large amount of ships, but they're all going to fundamentally fill a role, and they're not going to give a shit about like how much they're paid or I don't know, rights or anything. They're just going to, they have like one prerogative and they hunt towards it. And you see the same thing with social insects like wasps. And I think that Transformers, especially the Decepticons, do have a high degree of eusociality. They behave much less like a human military or faction. I mean, they do act like complete goofballs, especially early on. But even when they did act like goofballs, like the way they acted and the way they just seemed like a hive of bees or something. They seemed like a bunch of wasps. Like they were annoying, but they seemed to do things pretty formulaically. So they say that Energon. So there's the Energon cube, which is the main medium. And again, this is the cube analogy is pretty. It's pretty consistent. So Energon is found in a cube, and it looks like this. And then the Allspark is also a cube. And there just seems to be a lot of correlation because what is the spark itself? It seems to be derived from Energon. So if Energon, true Energon, is an emanation of Primus, the creator god of the Transformers, and is, in its most rarefied state, the basic building block of the Transformers' bodies and sparks. So even here, right here in the canon, the sparks and the bodies of the Transformers are mostly derived from Energon. This true Energon. So, in a sense, you could say that is it possible for certain compounds of silicon to potentially fill this role as both a metabolite and a building block, taking the role of both, basically the role that glucose plays in plants? Could you have something where energon takes the place of glucose? Because you combine glucose and you can get cellulose, you can get lignin, you can get every single building block in a plant derived from the glucose molecule and some other trace minerals. So what's to say that you couldn't get a similar compound doing the same thing that was actually based in silicon? What if energon is a silicon-based compound like glucose? Interesting to think about. So maybe we shouldn't discount artistic depictions of life because it seems very likely the stunticons. Yeah, the stunticons are plagued by a very unfortunate name because they were named stunticons because they're supposed to be doing tricks and stuff, but I feel like they're also named stunticons because they kind of just were generally retarded. Like they were just kind of just never followed any logic. They never were really team players. They didn't follow orders. So yeah, it was pretty funny seeing them. It's also hot as hell in October. I am leaving for Hawaii in like basically 5 days at this point. And one of the things I'm excited about is that I'm gonna basically skip winter completely. Like, but it's still hot as hell where I live. I'm like dying of thirst. I'm over here feeling like I'm in the Serengeti, trying to make it. But yeah, so in its most rarefied state, it's used as a building block. So energon is basically glucose for them. And if you think transformers are plants, but sometimes it's so here's what it says: a highly coveted substance. It is sometimes capable of inducing remarkable transformations in Cybertronians, reshaping and otherwise altering their bodies while imbuing great strength and other powers, either temporarily or permanent, depending on the duration and strength of the exposure. True energon is, however, extremely rare. In most universal streams, the Transformers Long War has a Cybertron drained of all but the smallest fraction of the substance. And although it has been known to exist on a small sampling of other planets throughout the universe, usually Earth, its paucity leaves the Transformers usually subsisting on artificially generated substance created from other local energy sources. So they're all after this stuff called energon, which is kind of like food and gas and blood and electricity all mixed into one. So energon seems to be a composite. So it isn't exactly food and gas and blood and electricity. Instead, energon simply provides all the building blocks that Transformers as organisms need to survive and reproduce. So energon is basically all they need. So is it possible that you could have a silicate-based organism that can take silicate compounds and create a stable source of metabolically active silicate compounds that then some other creature could come in and use? So transformers are not autotrophic. They require they can get energy from other sources that isn't energon, but they still need energon to live. So if they do need energon, at least in supplemental form, then that tells me that first and foremost they're not autotrophs. They're heterotrophs that need something else to build it. So wherever energon came from, whether it was another organism that was able to break, that was chemotrophic and broke down these silicon salts into a more available form chemically, or whether energon is made up of a compound of silicon and something else that was produced naturally by the formation of the planet. Either way, this is what they use. They're non-carbon based, but still metabolize like a carbon-based organism simply by using something or a compound that we don't use. So instead of having to breathe oxygen for our respiration and eat glucose and make ATP, use those phosphoruses to do active transport in cells and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that we need. As a result of that, we need phosphorus, we need nitrogen, we need, of course, carbon, we need water as sources of hydrogen. And what's crazy to me is like you look at everything that you need in your cells, like citric acid side, you need pyruvate. Do people think about where they get pyruvate? You need, I mean, for muscular function, you need calcium and trace amounts of copper, but not too much copper because zinc and copper are competitive. And you need a little bit of iron. But for the most part, you're basically just needing glucose and oxygen for the most part. That's not all you need, but you're going to get basically everything you need from the food you eat. Very few people in the West, especially, need to be taking multivitamins or supplements because you can basically get everything from your food. But Energon does the same thing for transformers. And there's nothing to say that a compound like this wouldn't exist, that some esoteric compound of silicon produced at, I don't know, a higher or lower energy in some foreign environment that Earth doesn't have. There's nothing to say that a compound like this either couldn't exist or that a life form that metabolized silicon wouldn't produce something like this. It's possible. And it's also exactly how they reproduce. So it's pretty fantastic that energon can be so intrinsically intertwined with their biology, because this is what you would expect to see with other organisms. And you could see how the energon affects them. I mean, it's a building block for everything they use. So while it may seem kind of weird to think that a glowing cube could become a bunch of new transformers, that glowing cube gives you everything you need to make a transformer, like literally everything. So there is, I don't know, it's gotten to the point now where if you can produce creatures like this, then the sparks and the bodies themselves seem to be based on non-carbon based life. So they're fundamental life forms, not just manufactured robots that are using energon as both a metabolic and structural component. And that's where he doesn't take this into account, because he's assuming that, okay, well, you're going to have chemical reactions that look just like what we see with silicone. But if you can get everything from one compound, that's interesting. That's a very interesting thing to think about, because he's trying to assume, oh, well, they're going to need other things besides just that silicon. And maybe they won't. Maybe they won't. Maybe there's an ability for the creature to make use of all of that energon without ever having to go down different roads. Just break everything down from the same source and only need that, which possible. So looking at non-carbon based life from here on out, their transformers themselves, again, they have their spark infusion. The other method that they talk about is forging. So in some Transformers tales, the creation of new sparks is tied to Cybertron itself. Only a healthy, thriving planet can naturally create the sparks that will become the next generation of Cybertronians. Some stories, most notably Dreamwave's Generation 1 comics and Align Continuity, have ascribed a well of all sparks as a physical mechanism from which new sparks are drawn up from the core of the planet. In other stories, a sacred artifact such as Vector Sigma or the Allspark can serve as an intermediary, the physical mechanism by which new sparks are imbued into living metal that will become their mortal form. The mass of living metal becomes a protoform, a living entity that is roughly analogous to a human fetus. So again, living metal. So they point out the fact that the metal of a transformer is alive. So it's, even if it might not be made out of cells per se, it's made out of metabolically active material, There are organisms, or at least some sort of organism analog, that makes up the metal of their bodies. So the living entity that is roughly analogous to human fetus, over time, the liquid metal mass cools and developed into a fully fledged transformer, adopting a unique personality and alternate mode, sometimes referred as protoforming or being protoformed. So this is a process called forging. So let me see. It was more weeks than the Eye comic, but coined the term forging to describe the entire process. In the years since, the term has grown to become a loose synonym for birth in general. So the allspark can be used as an intermediary for this process, but it does serve, along with the allspark or spark infusion, to be an aspect of mechanical construction. So it seems like mechanical construction was retconned and replaced with forging, where just like in the Terminator, they're made from this analogous ball of they're like the Necron or like the Catan or something, where they're made out of like a ball of metabolically active metals or something akin to it. And I think even though it's a semi-metal or only semi-metallic, I think that silicon might be the best candidate for something like that. I think that if you're going to look at the best candidate for a living metal or a living metal compound, then living metal compound, a living metal compound, then silicon's probably your best bet. I think if you're looking for the ultimate building block of the transformers, I think silicon has a strong, uh, I guess, what do you say, hypothetical? Because it's never mentioned in the lore. Like, it's not canon to say transformers are silicon-based organisms. We just know that they're not carbon-based. But they do seem to come from a liquid metal mass that is living. And I don't know what other liquid metal or liquid metal compound that you could get. It's like, is it mercury-based? I don't think so. It needs to have the properties of an organism that can build using this as a building block, and there's not very many compounds that can do that. Then there's sexual reproduction, which is really, I'm not really going to cover this. It's just kind of implied that transformers can like get together and make families, but transformer romance, this entire page, it's basically like giving me AIDS. Like, just reading this makes me realize everything that's wrong with the universe. Like, just look at this picture. Like, what need I say more? Oh, convoy, your shift letter is dirty, Marissa explains. This girl's like 7 years old. Um, there's there's this. I don't know if I just don't know what to say. Like, I can feel myself just slowly dying inside. And yeah, so it seems like Transformers do, for better or for worse, they seem to have an innate sense. Not only do they have an innate sense of sexual reproduction, but they also, well, let's just say they also have sex drive. You were recorded about a wedding of CoverGirl and Brawn. So she's marrying a Transformer, and she's drawn very curvaceously. And she's marrying an Autobot. So I don't know what to. And here we go. Here's wheelie humping the leg of Megan Fox. So we obviously see the Transformers after I burn my eyes out. We obviously see that Transformers are at least aware of. Let me see. Kissing is a regular sort of sign of affection with the headmasters. Chroma was rather thrilled he got to see RC transform. So Beast was the first to pick up on a subject more direct manner. So Silverbolt, let me see, goes to a Cybertronian version of a strip club, and later slyly makes a double entendre regarding Silverbolt's suspected kinky activities with Black Arachnia. Botanica also makes a lewd sounding comment about him interfacing with the computer, which he retorts to is more fun than plowing your little field of dreams, followed by the two sharing a knowing smirk. So sexual assault euphemisms are commonly inserted in the Japanese dubs of Western Transformers programs for humor, they say. So they make sexual assault euphemisms purely for chuckles. So the Japanese dub of Max will know more has Rat Trap, thinking himself about to be stabbed by Dinobot, asks his attacker to penetrate him, quote, gently, because I've heard the first time can hurt. All right, this is a little sus, Rat Trap. I'm not gonna lie. That's pretty sus, buddy. Rat Trap. We need a minute. We need a minute for Rat Trap. Why do robots engage in sexual reproduction? Because the writers are degenerates, DZ. That's why. That's why when your writers are a bunch of sexually frustrated 30-year-old Japanese virgins, they're gonna do stuff like this. Like again, like how do you sleep at night? It's like I don't know. The Japanese are predatory, reworked from a slasher movie homage to a parody Pepe Le Pew cartoons, has arachnids spewing lengthy string of sexual declarations, some thinly veiled and some not so much, as she amorously pursues Jack, including singing a Japanese folk song about a woman assaulting a man. So, yeah, this. By the way, this is arachnid. Like this is her picture, and so she's like, yeah, yeah. You can clearly see where all of these tentacles are going, and yeah, I don't know. Again, sexual frustration is one hell of a drug. References and innuendos have become increasingly more common in recent years. Scarlet and Bumblebee had a suggestive conversation about, quote, writing him, unquote, in Wolves and War of Issue 3. A Kree promised Bumblebee to, quote, rotate his tires, quote, if he could beat her. To which he responded with a most enthusiastic, woo hoo. In Dreamwave issue Infestation, one remark from Sunstreaker might suggest the existence of a Transformers STD. In ever questionable Kiss players, double genres can rife, with the most disturbing involving Optimus Prime deriving pleasure from Marissa Fairborn polishing his stick shift and rubbing the rim of his gas tank. Okay. I'm just going to read that again. With one of the most disturbing involving Optimus Prime deriving pleasure from Marissa Fairborn. This is Marissa Fairborn, by the way. Deriving pleasure from Marissa Fairborn polishing his stick shift and rubbing the rim of his gas tank. And in The Rise of Beast, Mirage loudly exclaims, quote, you've been inside me, unquote, in offense when Noah called him a work friend. This is Mirage, by the way. That's all about as far we're going to broach the subject. See, even the lore masters are like, that's as far as we're going to go. If you really want to know more on the matter of Transformers sex, an exciting world of fan fiction awaits you. Take note that doing so will be at your own risk, and TF Wiki accepts no liability for any psychological trauma incurred. So even the guys who know the lore know that you're a bunch of effing degenerates. Here is, oh, convoy, your shift lever is dirty, Marissa exclaims. It must be from when I spilled soft serve ice cream on you before. I'll wipe it clean for you now. Note, we did not make that up. That actually canonically happened. That's canon. And this girl's like 7 years old. So, again, the sacrifices I make for the pursuit of academic excellence. So the other two means basically here is that there's male and female Transformers. There's not really an indication that most reproduce sexually. And most see reproduction as completely alien. So it seems like sexual reproduction is something that's kind of just pushed in there to make them more relatable. It seems more so the fact that they're created from forging and spark and fusion. Because mechanical instruction was retconned in favor of forging. Spark and fusion is what we saw in all of the movies in live action, or not live action. I guess it is live action. But that's what we saw in the live action movies, which most people consider to be like probably the most canon Transformers in the modern age. I know that's like burns like acid to think about, but it's true. It's what most people think about when they think of Transformers now. But even in these older, earlier generations, it seems like forging is the way to go. There's cloning, which is basically using your own spark to create another Transformer. Yeah, but it's unclear, again, that it seems like they do take on different names, color schemes, develop new personalities, etc. And that doesn't seem any different than regular good old asexual reproduction via via for. I mean, you could use foraging because I think foraging implies that the creature themselves is not derived from anything but the core of the earth, but cloning is seemingly one of the ways that a transformer can make more of itself exactly, like an exact copy. So not like the main way to reproduce, but a good way of producing more of a usable of a certain frame. So these are the continuities, and basically, I'm trying to figure out exactly where this doesn't hold up. How does it even work? Metal bits have nerve endings. Well, it's all made. So their bodies are made of living metal, DZ. So remember, every single bit of their body, it isn't just like a shell of metal covering their bodies. It's living metal. It actually is some sort of organic organic metal of some sort of origin. This is why I think it's silicon based, because it's completely metallic, like it is metal, but the metal itself is alive. It's metabolically active, like the cells in your arm are alive. So Transformers are about their building factories to mass reproduce their species. So they did in the earliest days in Gen 1, they did indeed have factories that produced more Transformers. It was later that it was retconned into forging. The forging is where this happened, and forging happens deeper within the earth. So in later times, they didn't like make factories. Instead, they had forges where young Transformers would receive their spark from deeper within Cybertron, and then they would basically undergo development. They would become like little Transformer fetuses and develop into Transformers from there. And that's how you have like child-sized bots that grow into adult size, whereas in other cases they're literally assembled and given a spark. So there's different ways. Like you can assemble a transformer out of inorganic metal, and then the act of giving it a spark will transform that inorganic metal into living metal. Or you can make it sexually using your own living metal and your own spark, or you can use the all spark, or you could clone. And cloning seems like a method similar to forging. Literally dying of thirst. So here we're going to go into these aliens I saw a while ago. And because Hamas decided to uh, go on a rampage, like we're literally living in the fall of the Roman Empire 2.0. It's like Vimerica over here, but people don't understand just we don't you don't understand how close we are to like World War III. But while we're thinking of that, I'm going to talk about these Aryans. So what does it take to prove aliens exist? So he's talking about trying to find proofs. Like where's the proofs, like source. So Carl Sagan successfully wrote a bunch of drivel using his own assumptions about the world because his Christian parents, I don't know, slapped him or something. They beat him and just had a chip on his shoulder. So a lot of this is just like. So he talks about a lot of stuff in here about 50/50s and priors. Is this even the video I really wanted? So the ambiguity problem, detecting something that's ambiguous. So let's go back to so he very annoyingly he asked a question at 2 minutes and 30 and at like let me see. Yeah, he asked a question like the first like minute of the video and then got back to the original question at 9 minutes and 49 seconds. Like, cool worlds, I like your videos, bros. But like, can you stay on top? Like, I know I'm not the person to talk about staying on topic, but like, bro, like, come on, bro. Like, I'm streaming. Like, you have a 60-minute video you could edit. Like, why are you why are you getting back to this? So much more likely to know. If success is categorized as achieving consensus, then okay. So here is the supposed fossils on Mars. So those little streaks, they say like, oh, there could have been fossils on Mars, and I'm going to show another video talking about like, oh, we think Mars was covered in water because we have signs of effluvia and different compounds. Like, totally possible. but we haven't seen any signs of life. And if life did exist on Mars, it's very likely it's dead by now. Yeah, so they're seeing sulfur dioxide in atmospheres, and it's something we can look for. That would be a slam dunk in the biosignature of these atmospheres. But this is the issue: is detecting interstellar scintillation narrowband radio. This entire video is basically pointing out the fact that we don't have the technology really to even look for life in the first place. So Kyle Hill. So here's the video on Mars. Here's a video I did on Mars. Let me see. Or Kyle Hill does. Let me see. Cosmo presents. Yeah, this is the Cosmo one. Maybe the real aliens are extra-dimensional instead of extraterrestrial, which will explain the supernatural. See, that's another thing where, again, they believe in the multiverse, but there's a lot of, most scientists are extremely skeptical to be like, oh, multi dimensions, because it just seems like such a cop out. But ultimately, if you're going to say these are unidentified anomalous phenomenon or unidentified flying objects, if you're going to call them anomalous phenomenon instead of, because like, let's be clear. Let me pause real quick and look up the definition of UAP. So you go from UFO and UFE. So this is in German. So unidentified flying object, and then UAP is unidentified aerial phenomena. Unidentified aerial phenomena. So it is the same thing. But remember, what is the difference between an object and a phenomenon? No, there's the difference. You think it's the same thing, but the Pentagon and NASA are calling these phenomena, not objects, which is a very interesting distinction to me. Once I actually stopped and thought about it, this redesignation is very important, to not call it an object but a phenomena. What does that imply? If you're in NASA and you're coming out and saying that these objects, so you're going to come out and say that these objects are not of extraterrestrial origin. They're not of extraterrestrial origin. Also, that Mars, this Mars animation is amazing. But you say it's not of extraterrestrial origin. Then where does it come from? Do you really, either they're the Anunnaki and they're still around, or there's some eldritch beings, or there's some weird space whale that have colonized the planet, or they are extra dimensional beings. Like all these early interviews where people were saying, oh, they're demons. Like the word demon got spread around a lot from people who were whistleblowers initially trying to talk about this. And beyond calling them aliens, most people were calling them demons in this Pentagon leadership. This has been a problem for the Pentagon for a while, because what people don't understand is that this is also part of the Pentagon audit. So the Pentagon got audited and was found to be missing billions of dollars. So they have a bunch of money that's basically squirreled away into different programs. And they want to know, like, where are you spending this? Part of the money that was being spent was looking into these unidentified aerial phenomena. And because these whistleblowers came forward, there's also a lot of interest because they're wanting to know, okay, what other secret programs is the Pentagon hosting? And why isn't the public and other officials being made aware of things like literal unidentified anomalous phenomenon happening, or aerial phenomenon? They're anomalous. We don't know who or what is piloting these crafts that we have with military. I mean, I don't know how much more legit you have to get beyond the military, the U.S. Navy coming out and releasing footage of a bunch of drones that are going into water, coming out of water, spontaneously moving direction, no visible flight surfaces, and doing all kinds of anomalous stuff. And what's more is that they're not flying into space. Almost every single one of these UAPs with this naval footage are going into water. They're going into sources of water, not into space. So that tells us that the primary residence for these things is actually in sources of water around the world. It's incredible to think. Oh, sorry, I had to sneeze. But it's crazy. When we look at Mars now, they're talking about, oh, Mars, all the oxygen oxidized and formed the red dust, and it has a really big, dense core, and it's not right. It desiccated. We don't know what Mars looked like in the past. We also don't know planetary mechanics enough to say how planets form, how life emerges. But it could very well be the case that without life, a planet like Mars is doomed because heterotrophic organisms will constantly exude carbon dioxide. They'll actively allow greenhouse gases like methane to preserve the atmosphere by increasing heat on the surface. And they're saying, like, oh, it's because of the magnetic field blowing out the atmosphere. But maybe it's just the natural reaction of most of the atmosphere with underlying substrate rock. Maybe there just wasn't enough nitrogen in the atmosphere. Maybe the atmosphere was mostly oxygen or mostly oxygen, and then it just all reacted with either carbon or rock. And so basically Mars was just left, like, it formed a lot of water on its surface, but eventually that water boiled off after so many millions of years after its early formation, just because it couldn't retain that atmosphere. And they say it's because of the magnetic field, but we really don't know. Again, it's like they always feel like they're so clever giving these explanations because they're logical, and I give them that. But you don't really know. And I'm not gonna like just browse around. I'm gonna go back to the beginning map of Mars once, because now we're in the cartoon ball phase where they make pretend like they know what the inside of the planet looks like. And here we go. Here's all these geographic features of Mars, all these gullies and channels that sort of show that there may have been water erosion there in the past. And we have found water on Mars in the form of ice. But to go back in time and say, okay, what caused this? That's very different. That's very different. That's not the same question as, are these all created by sources of water? And if so, we could potentially find signs of life, but we just haven't yet. It also throws into question, if we do terraform Mars, what's to say that Mars itself won't return to this state without constant and expensive and highly resource demanding maintenance? Would it be worth terraforming Mars? I honestly feel like it'd be worth terraforming Venus before terraforming Mars. Because if it is a magnetic field, we either need to solve that by having like something in orbit that can deflect solar wind, or we just have to accept the fact that maybe Proxima Centauri is worth pouring effort into instead of Mars. And I know a lot of people are hating on the Mars colony idea for this, but I think that if you can solve that question, then terraforming Mars should be easy. It should be just a matter of recapturing much of the oxygen that was lost in the iron, and a lot of the hydrogen also lost in the form. Because I think if you transform most of the water on Mars into hydrogen and oxygen, then you could, I don't know. I think at that point it would just be a matter of renewables. Like, I feel like you could create more water on Mars using the chemicals on Mars, because a lot of water is trapped in rock chemically, like it's bound to rock, like hydrogen and oxygen that could be freed and made into more water. So maybe you got to crack an omelet to make a few eggs, as the saying goes. But Mars is an anomaly. I mean, it seems to me that there's no real proof of life on Mars. It seems to be a barren rock, pretty as it is. I like the geography. I've always liked Mars. I've always wanted to go to Mars, even just to visit. But the idea of long distance terraforming on Mars, I could see it being possible. I feel like I could personally pull the Martian. Like, I could grow potatoes and survive for a year on Mars. You know what I'm saying? But would I want to, quality of life wise? I don't know. I feel like Mars, we need to take a sober look at what we want out of Mars. Is it just going to be a playground for us to test vehicles and have a shipyard? It's less gravity, less strenuous to put stuff in space, still enough resources for us to live. I could see massive habitation, like massive domed theaters and stuff where we have parks and Earth life and
make a facsimile of home on Earth, but beyond a few major spaceports or military testing bases, I just don't see how Mars is going to be a viable candidate for terraforming. I feel like we should actually go to a planet that's Earth sized and has Earth chemistry before we try to waste, a couple thousand years trying to make it into another Earth. So I think we should honestly, I mean, we got to explore faster than light stuff if we're ever going to make it. I just don't see us at our current technology. Like Starship is impressive, but Mars is going to be, if anything, just a milestone. It's going to be a major achievement to get to Mars and found on Mars and settle on Mars, because then who knows how fast human achievement will progress. Maybe I'm dead wrong. Maybe we could terraform Mars in 200 years. Maybe we could find a way to produce large amounts of water on Mars, or bring water from the asteroid belt, which is relatively close nearby, and fill Mars with water. Maybe there's a way for us to feasibly do this on a large scale. But on the other hand, maybe we're going to spend millennia trying to scrape out of living on Mars, and it's going to become like the 40K Mechanicus Hive world, just nothing but a bunch of continuous prefabs, and it's just going to be a techno dystopia. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like we're heading towards grimdark. If this century is anything to go off of, if we're in the third millennium, look how bad things are already in the third millennium. We got men in wigs reading to children. We got people drawing transformer shenanigans with little girls. It's like, dude, we're already in the third century. I don't even want to see what the 41st millennium is going to look like. For real. 41st millennium is going to be off the chain. Let me see. It says maybe oh yeah. Oh, wait a minute. I just read this one. It will primarily be a mining colony if they haven't figured out how to mine asteroids. And we don't have a God Emperor. Remember, the God Emperor only showed up, I think he only showed up in the 30th millennium. Because he didn't show up during the Age of Strife or the Dark Age of Technology. So I think he showed up in like the 28th millennium. I don't. Let me check. But the Emperor didn't show up for like 20, 30,000 years. He's said to have been born, whatever. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a hive world. It's definitely going to be a dystopia. I don't know if I would ever live on Mars. If Elon Musk came to me and said, you could be one of the first people to live on Mars as a colony, I'd probably, first of all, I'd be torn, because I know that if I live on Mars, I'm never going to pay taxes. I'm going to have so much freedom to do what I want. But at the same time, you're going to also be trapped on a dead world. And I don't think people understand that Mars is a dead planet. There's no grass, there's no animals. It's just like everything I love about the world comes from nature, and it just feels like there's no nature on Mars. It's a sterile rock. So I don't know, guys. I don't know. But we definitely do not have the God Emperor for sure. Like that, we lost our chance in the 40s, guys. But I don't know. Maybe Trump has hope. I feel like when we get the God Emperor, we're gonna know, because I've always understood the God Emperor, because 40K is another medium that has been drilled into the dirt, and I don't think is very. I feel like the Tyranids. The Tyranids are a really good race to look at, and so are the orcs in terms of potential ways that life forms can reproduce and proliferate. But otherwise, 40K is kind of like a meme. It's kind of just a giant inside joke from extrapolating on fantasy, and people forget that. People forget that 40K started as one giant joke. That was a giant parody of fantasy. That was like, oh, what if you took this fantasy setting and literally put them 40,000 years in the future? It started as a joke, just some arbitrarily far off number in the future, and fantasy doesn't sell shit compared to 40K. And it's kind of funny how in the modern day, especially because of Starship and Astra and all of these private space industries, after the Challenger, people completely lost interest in space. That space shuttle disaster, that space shuttle blowing up was like the 9/11 of space. It basically ruined space for an entire generation, and people lost interest in it. They didn't really give a crap about space. You had NASA missions planned for 15 years in the future, and no more space. It's just like NASA just basically kind of kicked rocks and just continued costing the taxpayer $40 billion a year because reasons, but they never did anything. They contracted out all their rockets, and it was just stagnant. And then SpaceX hit the scene, and suddenly Bezos wanted in on the action, and the Chinese were getting all fired up, and the Russians were, I guess, gearing up for a war with Crimea. So I guess it wasn't the same. But you have India landing on the moon. I mean, God, bro, like if you told me that Indians would land on the moon, Indians from like India, these guys barely have functioning toilets and they're landing probes on the moon. Mad respect. Mad respect. You still wipe with your hands, but mad respect. And look, like I was saying earlier, the Mars rover, is the Mars rover alive? You could say it's not made of living metal. Maybe that's the difference. Maybe that's what makes Transformers alive, is the living metal. This Martian geography just trips me out. I mean, I know it's cartoon balls and shape-shifting animals. It's a Bethesda world. It really is. I mean, I would be surprised if we're not collecting bottle caps. But it's crazy to think that at one point people really thought that those tunnels were made by creatures. And I think a lot of this water was on Mars stuff is made as cope, because maybe there is pretty strong evidence of some of those being artificially made. Like it's equally possible that like that massive canyon was dug out by some massive strip mining operation. It doesn't really look like it was formed by water. It really doesn't. That massive scar, it looks like a giant key. It's all dug out in parallel directions. It doesn't look like something that a river would create. But again, remember that Mars has only 2/3 the gravity of Earth. So, or 1/3 the gravity of Earth, whatever it was. I know the moon is 1/6. I think Mars is 1/3. Venus is 91%. Venus is a better candidate for terraforming solely because if you can cool down Venus enough or thin out its atmosphere enough, then you're basically good to go. Like it seems daunting because it's so hot, but all you have to do is find a way to thin out the atmosphere. They're like, oh, we got to cool it down. I'm like, why not just, I don't know, why not just put something in the atmosphere that breaks down or forces like the sulfur to react into a solid form? Like something like that, where you could take out like most of the more harmful chemicals by chemically binding them to a solid. I could see that working way better than just trying to like put up some solar beams or something. There's a whole map of Mars. It's crazy. I think it's possible. If you look at other planets, even very rocky planets, it'll work. Maybe they fake it to get more funding and run away with the money. Well, NASA doesn't really have to fake anything to get away with the money. It just straight up just siphons it from the taxpayer like a bunch of vampires. I swear NASA's been used as a money laundering operation for the last like 3 decades. Especially for the last 12 years. It's just like since the space shuttle, it's like you never really spearheaded anything. I'm actually dying out here. Like, I don't know why it's so hot. It's like October where I live at the moment, it just gets so muggy. It's so muggy in the fall. I hate it. I mean, it's not as bad as being rained out. The weather's actually really good. But it's like, oh, it's so much more humid than it usually is. So I do have a comic. So let me make the camera bigger. I'll leave Mars on in the background. I'll have to subject you to my extremely cringe camera. Make myself smaller. Okay, so I'm gonna play Mars, but I'm gonna show you. So this came, and my mom told me what they were. I had to ask her. And there's this comic. It's called Chick Publications. This used to be, I guess, pretty big back in the day, because I had no idea what it was when I first saw it. I had to do research. And this pamphlet came in with my Panda Express when I ordered an Uber. So the Uber lady combined this with my order. She handed it off to me with my Chinese food. And I'm going to read you guys, instead of reading a Dojinishi, I'm going to read you guys this. It's fully, it has images and everything. And it's actually pretty explicit. It's like shockingly explicit. It involves like sacrifice. It involves like animals. Like this page is animal sacrifice. Okay, blurry cam. So let me make this bigger. So this says, "Oh mighty Satan, we sacrifice this cat to you on your birthday." And then this guy says, "I don't want the cat as my sacrifice. I want carnage." And guys, I got this from Uber Eats. Like I did not buy this comic. He's killing everybody. Yeah, meow. Oh no, it's the same killer. We'll need an army. So I'm gonna read this out to you page by page, and you guys can join along. So here's the first page. Let me stop that. I'm gonna go back to this. So this says, this is the first page of this. Let me see how I can turn this, because I don't want to like screw too much. It says, "You rented this whole place for only $50? Yeah, man. It's for our Clash Halloween party." Then it goes over on this side. And this is page 3. It's like, "Everybody who's anybody from Shaolin High will be there." And keep in mind, these guys all look like they're in their 40s. They're drawn like they're old men. "Charlie, I know why you got this place so cheap." "Why?" "Because last Halloween, 13 people were murdered here." "What?" Gasp. So these are grown men taken aback. Apparently, they were in high school. This is Camp Basil Bub grand reopening. So here's the here's the second page of my random Uber Eats pamphlet. Here it says, "Did they get the killer? They riddled him with bullets but couldn't find his body. He must be dead." And that's what we call foreshadowing. "Then there's nothing to worry about. The gang should have gotten here by dark. Boy, I got a surprise for them." And then it goes on to state, right over here, says, "Charlie will sacrifice a cat to Satan at midnight. What a way to end a party. Ha ha." And this guy in the back is like, "That's gross." But he's thinking it because he has social anxiety and won't say it out loud. And then it says, "They're coming to my birthday? Rats, I forgot my chainsaw." So the guy has a pumpkin on his head. And there's cars with people in it honking. And then the page I showed originally, it says midnight. And it says, "Almighty Satan, we sacrifice this cat to you on your birthday." And then the cat's saying, "Meow." And then crash, buzz. It's like, "I don't want the cat as my sacrifice. I want Carrie." And then the cat and this random dude is like, "Oh, it's killing everybody. Help. Yeah, no, burrs." And you can see like the cat and the mouse escaping. Dude with his hands up. And over here it says, "Chief, there's another massacre going down at Camp Basil Bum. Oh no, if it's the same killer, we'll need an army." So now the ops and the cops are out on the hunt. So it definitely escalates from here. Like I thought it was going to die down. Apparently we've just started. It says 40 minutes later. So it says, "You're next. Die, you fiend." Blam, blam, blam. So they're all shooting guns at it now. It's like, "What is it?" It says, "Surprise." and it looks like it's the devil. It's like, run! Tis the devil himself. Gulp. He vanished into thin air. We've already got 19 dead. You gotta stop him, Chief. And then it goes on to say, he must be on his way to the village. May the saints preserve him. So the cops tried to shoot the devil like a black person on crack, and unfortunately, the devil seems to be impervious to bullets. So here we go. The devil. We're at the who even paid money to publish this? Dog, I don't know. I honestly don't know. So here we go. This continues. Wait a minute. I'm so used to reading manga. I'm sorry. Let me see. It says, outside the village church, that little creep is praying when it is a party time. Good, here he comes. And as you can see, the devil's hairy and wearing horns. Has a big hook nose peering into a church. Interesting. And the dog's running away. Looks like it's terrified. Then it says, Yah! It shows the devil with his big teeth and his hook nose and his pointed ears and pointy beard. And the kid's like, gasp. Then the kid says, Yamete! Oh, wait a minute. Wrong page. Let me get back to this one. And then he says, the Lord rebuke you, Satan. And then it says, submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. James 4:7. And then it comes over here, and the devil's like, yeah, I hate you, and I hate your lousy birthday. As he literally shaking his fist. There are two lines next to his fist. He's literally shaking his fist at the devil like he's an 80-year-old man. But we're not done yet. We're not done. There's a whole. This is not over yet. This is not over yet. Here is. Again, I'm showing the wrong page first. So it says the next morning. Says, Pastor, is Halloween really Satan's birthday? No, Joey. He was created in heaven, and his name was Lucifer. He was a beautiful creature who guarded God's throne. Then he rebelled against God, so he was kicked out of heaven. About a third of the angels rebelled too, and were kicked out with him, and they became demons, and Lucifer became Satan. Who kicked him out of heaven, Pastor? His creator, the Lord Jesus Christ. I hate that name, says Satan in a thought bubble. So here's something that actually I never understood about Christianity. And it's probably the thing that I still don't understand to this day. If God is all-powerful and all-knowing, then how the fuck did like 1/3 of all angels rebel against him successfully? Like, think about it like this. If they failed at the rebellion, wouldn't they just be placed back under the yoke? Like, it doesn't seem... I just don't see how you can have 1/3 of your angels rebelling against you be a W. Like, even if you crush them, I feel like that's an L, bro. Like, I don't think that doesn't seem like something an all-powerful and all-knowing being would fuck up. Like, I'm just going to be honest. Like, it just doesn't... That seems like a bit of a fuck up. Like, a bit of a huge fuck up. Like, literally 1/3 of your angels rebelled against you. But that's a bit of a fuck up. Not going to lie. That's like if you have 10 wives and 4 of them cheat on you. I'm like, look, dog, even if you beat your wives for cheating on you, you still got cucked by 4 out of your 10 wives. So I don't know. It's like having 3 kids, and one of your 3 kids like shits on your laptop, and you have to kick them out of your house. Like, do you feel like you're really like, oh, I'm in control, when one of your kids is like all bipolar and, you know, shitting on laptops and being chronic? But anyway, so now I've gotten the gist of it. But it just keeps on going. Like, once they give you that teaser, they just keep milking it. So here's the pastor again, who looks like a depressed lumberjack. Again, I do not know who's making this. Says, Satan is alive and well, and is busy destroying mankind. He and his demons know their time is short. They're afraid of Jesus Christ because he created a lake of fire for them. But Satan wants everybody to fry in hell with him. Unfortunately, he'll get most of them. He is a master deceiver, and Halloween is just one of his tricks. So, so Halloween is a trick of the devil, and the pastor looks depressed because he knows most people are going to go to hell. It's very funny because Christ is apparently supposed to be a redeemer, and yet he's convinced all these people are going to go to hell, even though they're supposed to be redeemed. Which, again, I don't know how that makes sense. But okay, here we go. Here's the exact next page. Again, I haven't read past this point, so it's kind of funny that he immediately points out, just like the kids doing their thing. So he says, "Kids love Halloween because it's both fun and scary. Twick or tweet," like literally with the W's, "twick or tweet." But they have no idea what's behind this celebration. To the Satanists and witches, Halloween is no joke. It is their most solemn ceremony of the year. As we get closer to the second coming of Jesus, Satanism will increase. So will human sacrifice. So that like literally just completely fucking escalated from like kids getting candy to human sacrifice in like big bold letters and an exclamation point. It says, Halloween started in the British Isles with the Druids. Those guys were really spooky. And Druids were literally just shamanic leaders that maintain oral traditions in the Celtic community. And actual Halloween comes from Samhain. So Samhain was the idea that the line between the spirit world and our world became especially thin during the fall equinox to November 1st. Most Christian holidays are pagan. Hey, get out of here with your facts and logic. The Yule log, just because the Yule log came from Yule doesn't mean that it's pagan, dude. It's redeemed. The Christmas tree, I know that pagans used to worship trees, and that's why the Christmas tree became a thing, but come on, bro, it's sanctified. I mean, wouldn't it be kind of poor taste to be like hanging decorations on a cross, though? Like, let's be real. And nobody wants a manger in their house. I mean, come on, man. Okay, so here's... Oh, here we go. They actually mentioned Samhain. See, Samhain isn't spelled as Samhain, so I'm glad that I'm not like looking like a complete retard calling this Sam Hain. But the Samhain is pronounced Samhain, and it's Irish. So Irish, okay, come on, get in frame. October 31st was a night of terror called Samhain. That night, the Druids went to house, taking victims for human sacrifice. So the best way to get conservatives riled up is if you show like a white woman being taken by like any race of darker skinned male. Like show a white woman being taken by a giant monkey, and suddenly you have people going to see King Kong. And then it transitions over. So Satan loves Halloween because it glamorizes the powers of darkness, drawing little kids into his camp. And it's paying off. Witchcraft is exploding among teens today. The Lord hates Halloween and its evil origin. Satanic human sacrifices are a slap in God's face. So I don't know who in the hell this dude is talking to, but ain't nobody committing human sacrifices, bro. Goddess fertility, Ishtar and Easter. Ishtar. You know, get out of here with your facts and logic, DZ. I bet you're fucking heathen yourself, motherfucker. Pagan. You're over here. I bet you sacrifice children. All right, here we go. We're in the home stretch. I think this is like the second to last page. Okay, again, I'm doing the mangaka thing. Wait, which? Okay, it's this page. Again, this priest is very comfortable talking alone with this child. It says, Satan's sacrifices are a mockery of God's perfect sacrifice for our sins. You mean when Jesus was crucified? Yes. So, again, the Christian tradition revolves around human sacrifice. And yet they claim that the human sacrifice of Halloween is horrendous. Again, I think it's very funny how this talk of trying to prevent human sacrifice is ultimately revolving around someone's sacrifice. So it says Halloween opens the door to Satanism. Read Lucifer Dethroned and Blood on the Doorposts by William and Sharon Schubine. What is it? Schnobelen. So again, it says Satan hates this message and blocks at every chance he gets. He has blinded people's minds to the truth. That's his trick. And then this last page, it says, this is what Satan doesn't want you to read. Don't read that part, trust me. Sin stops everyone from going to heaven, but God in his perfect love provided the way. He sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die in our place. And then, yeah, it talks about, because am I the only one that finds it extremely ironic that this whole book you talk about how horrendous it is, like, to talk about human sacrifice, and yet your entire religion revolves around human sacrifice. If you believe Jesus died for your sins and receive him in your personal savior, you will be saved from hell. Then you will reign with Jesus forever. Now that's the smart move. But if you're a dummy and go with Satan, hi guys, welcome to the laughing place. Hey, you rat. Got the picture? So it says Christian bookstores. So here's how to grow as a new Christian. Read the next step available at Christian bookstores from Chick Publications. It says, if you trust the last page is what you can do today. Read your King James Bible every day to get to know Jesus better. Talk to God in prayer every day. Be baptized, worship, fellowship, and serve with other Christians. Tell others about Jesus. Admit you're a sinner. Be willing to turn from sin. Believe that Jesus Christ died for you through prayer in Jesus' name. So yeah, this was included in my. Again, all it says is boo. This was included with my Uber Eats the other day. And it says Chick Publications. Very interesting read. Everybody has a propaganda, you know. This is literally like a Christian propaganda leaflet. And I don't have any problem with it. Like, I'm religious myself, but I just think that this kind of strategy is a bit dumb. Because again, modern Christianity is full of hypocrisy. And that's something that I've acknowledged for years. I mean, they're fucking hypocrites. I mean, these same people who go on and on and on about, oh, fucking Halloween is so satanic. Oh, all this, you know, trying to encourage human sacrifice. I'm like, bro, your entire religion involves like cannibalism, like taking the blood and body of Jesus that you believe is literally transmuted into his flesh and blood, and commemorating not only his sacrifice, but when he literally rose from the dead, like the Lich King. And I'm like, look, bro, like, you believe in that? You don't believe in that? It's up to you. That's what faith is. It's why you have faith. But to me, I just think it's so funny to lecture other people on shit like sacrifices and cannibalism and murder and meeting up in places. It's like early Christian churches. That's exactly what people did. They met in dark places. They met in the woods. They met in people's basements, and they enacted these early Christian rituals. And I just think that, like, it's okay to think a certain way and feel a certain way. And I don't have any issues really with Christianity in terms of its base doctrine. I just have an issue with modern Christian churches. And it's like this modern Christian mindset to like target Halloween. I'm like, oh, wow, you know, it's funny that you go after Halloween as a holiday, but won't go after the anti-Christian assholes that basically run our country. And I don't know, it's kind of this soft attitude that I think is just pervasive with many modern American Christians. Like the fact that there's an entire scene dedicated to the sheriffs trying to like shoot Satan and kill him. I'm like, this is clearly some like American evangelical shit, because I didn't see much of this in Germany. In Germany, it was mostly like you just let people come to you. So I found that very funny. I am a heathen. I sacrifice unborn baby chickens to my frying pan every day. See, man, like I prefer the wheat to poachly. Like, going out and cutting out like a chicken heart, putting it out on the altar. Now you can complain about those people, but what's crazy to me is, again, it's your entire religion incorporates sacrifice, martyrdom, cannibalism into its very core tenets. And even though that's based, I mean, at the same time, I just, again, listen to the parts of the Bible where it says, let he who's without sin cast the first stone. If you want to shit on people's holidays, bro, if you want to rain in the parade because you're against the Irish or you think Samhain's satanic, looky here. It says in the book of Ezekiel that our powers are not between flesh and blood, but within principalities, powers, and forces greater than ourselves. There is an acknowledged presence of greater forces and spirits and alternative deities that exist within the Christian tradition and always have. The Christians recognized the gods of different pantheons as existing, but being subordinate to the creator of the universe. That was never in question. The sign that there's only one God but God, it's like only one being, the creator of the universe, has the ability to have that mantle, but all other lesser beings cannot. And I think that when you acknowledge the fact that, and this is something I'm going to talk about in a later episode about the four-dimensional universe, we can't see higher dimensions that exist in our universe, like the depth within depth of the fourth dimension. There's a game called, and I'm gonna put this up. There's like 4D. What is this? There's like a 4D. Let me see, 4D Minecraft. So there's this 4D Minecraft, and it like basically shows that the fourth dimension is like if you stood in a third dimensional room, you could only see whatever is directly in front of you, but nothing to the sides. So if I looked at this book, it's directly in front of my face so I can see it. But if I were to move it off to the side like this, I couldn't see it anymore. So the fourth dimension is being able to see around that axis. And I like this because when you go up a step, you realize that things like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, you realize that light exhibiting different properties when you're observing it versus not observing it, all of that can be explained by the fourth dimension. And this is why I really dislike how modern scientists think that they just have all of the answers, because without being able to accurately observe four dimensions or anything higher than four dimensions, three dimensions being our absolute limit, then how can you possibly say that you can know the inner workings of the universe if you can't see in fourth or fifth dimensions? Especially the fourth dimension, which we solidly know exists. We can basically simulate four dimensions, but we can't perceive it. So here's how he's going to talk about the fourth dimension by comparing it to a two-dimensional object. So this is apparently Frank the Frog. He's on a two-dimensional axis, and he basically explains the best way I've ever seen anybody explain how this four dimension works. So look, he is able to impose a two-dimensional object, a two-dimensional being, so we can allow him to explore a two-dimensional slice of the 3D world around him, because Frank the Frog is bound by two dimensions, but you can still render in the environment he would be living in. So here's what Frank is interacting with. He has the ground beneath him, he has the sky above him, he has terrain in front and behind him, but see, he can't see the dirt beneath the soil. He can't see the rock. He can't see the cavity that's in there, but we can, because we're looking at Frank and his environment from a higher dimensional plane. We're looking at Frank the Frog from three dimensions, but this two-dimensional frog, he can't see below the ground. He can't see the stone and the rock and whatever. Just like if we're in a 3D space, like where I'm at right now, if you look around your room, a four-dimensional being would able to see inside of boxes, reach inside of boxes, see inside of your body, which he's going to go over in this video too, see underneath the ground, see through walls. Like there's totally different properties. And I think the reason you can't measure the position and the momentum of an object consistently when trying to experiment. And the reason why quantum mechanics just doesn't work out is because most things seem to be operating on a higher dimensional plane. And see, he can reorient it. And as you reorient yourself within a three-dimensional environment, you change the terrain and the view around you. So you can try to get a grasp on where you are, but even when you reorient yourself in 4 dimensions, you'll see that your environment completely changes. The 3rd dimension is just one layer of depth, and that you can go deeper. So he says, imagine you're in your living room, 4th dimensional being snatches you away. Let me make sure you can actually, I just realized I'm not sure if I. So imagine the 4D aliens watching right now, but you can't see them. Exactly. That's something that actually happens in this game. You can be standing right next to somebody and they will never see you until they turn into your line of sight. Because in the 4th dimension, you can look all around you, but only by orienting yourself in a certain way in the 4th dimension will you be able to see that object. That an entity can be standing right next to you and you would never be able to see or interact with them in 3 dimensions. It's crazy shit. When you realize what the 4th dimension is, it'll change your view of reality completely. That's exactly what ends up happening. And that's what he's going to show in this video as well. He's going to show how in the 4th dimension, you can stand right next to somebody and they will never see you. So he says this places you in a 4th dimensional world, completely out of your element, and you have a dial. So you can rotate yourself to the 4th dimension using that dial. Because otherwise, we're stuck on one orientation. Like we're oriented by 3 axes, X, Y, and Z. So length, width, and depth is the 3 dimensions. This 4th dimension is the depth within depth, the height within height, the length within length. So it's an axis that is not bound by 3 axes. So here, the right-hand rule, which is motion, field, and current, but also the right-hand rule applies in physics to explain length, width, and depth or height. And those are the 3 dimensions. The 4th dimension is oriented away from all 3 positions. If I put another thumb here, I'm oriented lengthwise, height-wise. So there's nothing I can put in a 3-dimensional space that is not incorporating length, width, or height. But there does seem to be, mathematically speaking, another axis that you can tack on. We just can't perceive that axis. There's an axis that goes into my hand itself. Like in the 4th dimension, I could see completely through my hand if I reoriented my perspective in the 4th dimension. And that's what you're seeing basically here. By reorienting yourself in 4 dimensions, you can see different sides of the universe. So it's a 4th dimensional hyperspider. And the parts that you can see are orienting in the 4th dimension. You'll never be able to see the entire thing at once. So this 4-dimensional hyperspider shows an object that can spontaneously manifest, demanifest, and remanifest. And that does seem to explain somewhat of this extra, I guess, maybe dimensional phenomenon that we're seeing with these extraterrestrials. And again, I think people don't understand that the extra dimensional possibilities for these UAPs and UFOs is very strong. Like it's very likely. Because if these beings can access the 4th dimension, they don't even have to do anything but just step out of our alignment. We might be living right on top of them. They might be living right on top of us, and we may not even know. We might be living our entire lives side by side with highly advanced, higher dimensional beings that have no fucking idea that they're even there unless they want to show themselves to us. Whether or not we see them is completely up to them. See, he couldn't even see that wood until he has to shift his orientation to the 4th dimension to even interact with, not even just see the wood, but actually interact with the wood, he has to change his orientation in the fourth dimension to cause the wood to manifest. It's crazy shit. Like this is a game that I highly recommend, because once you get a feel for how things in the fourth dimension work, it completely fundamentally changes your view of reality. I can't drill that into you enough. This is something I highly recommend you guys try. This is actually the developer itself, but this is called 4D Miner. 4D Miner. And it is whacked out. Like watch what he's going to do to this wall. It just looks like a cave, right? Just a normal depression, but it doesn't look like it leads anywhere. But then he changes his perspective in 4 dimensions, and now you have a full functioning cave system. So trippy fucking shit. What looked like nothing but just a hole in the wall, a literal hole in the wall, is now a full-blown cave system because he reoriented himself in the 4th dimension. Now he can access the cave. So there's always stuff in the 4th dimension that you can't see. So he's constantly reorienting himself to find new ore. Because again, you can't interact with stuff outside of your specific orientation. So on Earth, we're all stuck in one 3-dimensional orientation. This guy's manipulating his 4th dimensional orientation to see new objects in the 4th dimension. So objects in the 4th dimension are completely outside of our plane of existence. They can see us, they can see inside of us, see around us in hyper detail, but we will never be able to we can't smell them, we can't see them, we can't even interact with them. But they can interact with us, and it's crazy ass shit to realize that if there are beings that are greater than if that's even possible, that higher dimensional beings exist, then we have to accept the possibility that it could throw into question everything we know about the universe and its origins. Everything we know about life, everything we know about the sun, everything we know about planets. I mean, look at gravity. If you put a 3-dimensional object on a 2-dimensional sheet and put other objects on that sheet, it'll behave exactly like gravity does in 3 dimensions. It implies that objects like celestial bodies, like suns and planets, are 4th dimensional objects resting in a 3-dimensional medium, and that 3-dimensional medium behaves the same way as a 3-dimensional medium on a 2-dimensional medium. A ball in a sheet behaves the same way as a planet in space. Why is that? It would make a lot more sense if we saw gravity not as a particle or wave, like where is the gravitron? We don't have a gravitron because gravity is a product of 4-dimensional physics. It's a product of physics operating on the 4th dimension. Most objects with mass are actually 4-dimensional, but we can only perceive them in 3 dimensions, probably because our brains are not sophisticated enough to handle the level of detail that 4 dimensions would actually require. We just can't process that naturally, mentally. Yeah, it's supernatural. We think of supernatural as just another layer of physics. If it's not a hallucination, then it's very well likely a product of 4-dimensional physics. So think about this next time you see UAP footage. Think about this next time you see extraterrestrials or the idea of like alien life, because any species or organism that can develop 4-dimensional awareness, either technologically or somehow biologically, because again, in order to perceive 4 dimensions, you'll need you would have to need some sort of revolution in your brain capacity, because that level of detail would just break our brains. There's a reason we can't see 1,000 colors. It's because the amount of processing, the amount of machinery you'd have biologically would just be insane. Like being able to see in 4 dimensions would probably break most people. We just couldn't function like with this. I don't know. It's just another layer of existence on top of what we have now. It's already tough enough dealing in 3rd dimensions, but maybe it's enough. Just like how bacteria exist in biofilms, do we need 4 dimensions? Do we need to have depth within depth? I don't know. It's hard to say. But as you can see here, being able to reorient yourself in 4 dimensions basically expands the size of the universe fundamentally for you. Because you could wall yourself into this I think what he's going to do, he's going to wall himself in, but then the hyper spiders can still get to him. Even if he's walled off, thinks he's walled off, the hyper spiders can still get to him. But again, he built a 3-dimensional hut, but not a 4-dimensional one. What's it going to take to make a 4-dimensional construct? So as you can see, there's a gaping hole in this wall, and he has to basically build the same structure multiple times in order to make a 4-dimensional object. And so you have to basically build the same house over and over and over again. So he says to build underground. Surround yourself complete with matter on all 4 sides. But even then, that might not work, because you might be digging into a cave system and not even know it. When you rotate in 4D, you're looking at uniquely shaped slices of 4D blocks. If you take an artistic approach to building, you can use these shapes to make it more interesting. So here he's made a face using one slice of a 4-dimensional object. Because again, that's what all these are. Like, they're 3-dimensional slices of 4-dimensional objects. He wrote out the word subscribe by twisting a certain way. But this seems to be the basic mechanics of this world. And understand, too, that the implication is that machines that we have now can very easily generate 4-dimensional constructs. It's just that we're still physically unable to comprehend these 4-dimensional constructs, so we need them put into another medium. So this is completely mathematically feasible. The 4th dimension is all but mathematically proven to be possible, if not exist outright. The only distinction is that we can't physically picture that. We just don't have the brain mechanics to actually picture the 4th dimension. So we're a bit stuck on that regard. So 3D objects has 2D shadows. Does that mean 4D objects has 3D shadows? Exactly. It's exactly what that is. A 4-dimensional object will cast a 3-dimensional shadow. Again, it's something that's mind-breaking to think about. It's something that's mind-breaking to think about. That we may all just be 3-dimensional shadows of 4-dimensional objects, which may actually be the case. If gravity can be extrapolated so easily to 2 dimensions, because look at this. If I go over here and I look up, first I'm going to like this, I didn't realize. Gravity experiment. So watch this. Gravity visualized. Watch how, using a 3D object on a 2-dimensional medium, he can simulate almost exactly what we see with 3-dimensional space-time. So he's explaining the lecture. I think I can put on captions. So he's using a sheet of Lycra. So this sheet of, so he's talking about sails. So he puts down 2 balls. So that Einstein's picture of objects were space-time, yada, yada, yada. But as you can see, the properties of 3-dimensional objects placed on a 2-dimensional sheet are almost exactly 1-to-1 with what we observe with gravity. So watch, once we place an object with mass at the center of the 2-dimensional sheet, it deforms the sheet. The sheet is deformed and it creates a well, just like gravity wells we see in nature, inside of it. And if we throw an object at the center, it will orbit inside of it. This is shockingly accurate, despite being extremely primitive, something that a literal caveman could create using a buckskin or a bison hide and rocks. It mimics almost 1-to-1 exactly what we see out in the universe concerning planets. This 3-dimensional object is warping a 2-dimensional medium the exact way that 3-dimensional space-time is being warped. See, now he gave it a sideways push, and now the object is orbiting the object within the gravity well for multiple rotations until it gets close enough to where it destabilizes and hits the object. So sideways motion moving towards the gravity well induces an orbit until it eventually collides with the object. And so this experiment is showing us that, at least with a solar system model, this behaves almost one-to-one with gravity. Doesn't that then imply that you would see the exact same properties if gravity is a three-dimensional phenomenon and that this pull is happening in all directions, not just in two directions, like on a two-dimensional object, but in all of these directions? If it's happening within the entirety of the third dimension, doesn't that imply that celestial objects are inherently fourth-dimensional objects? And if that's the case, then we're just seeing a three-dimensional slice of a four-dimensional object. And looking at it mathematically, when we look at these models like this, where you just break it down by one-dimensional layer, just like with Frank the Frog, you can see that the exact same properties can be observed on a two-dimensional scale. That to me is some crazy shit. And I think people need to understand that next time they come out talking about these UAPs, because if you're not out here understanding that the fourth dimension is a thing that exists and that we need to be careful of it, then I don't know, bro. There might be some four-dimensional waifu watching you jerk your pud to degenerate shit on 4chan. So I don't know, man. Keep in mind, they might be watching you, bro. You never know, bro. You never know. It might be the devil, might be angels looking at you, rubbing your meat. That's why I should get a doll, bro. I'll never spy on you again. Man, 2 hours, 60 minutes in. I'm about to wrap this up. Keep in mind, banging 40. 4 dussy, bro. 4 dussy. Geodesic, literally double jointed, quadruple jointed pussy. That is some insane shit right there. But yeah, DZ, I appreciate you dropping by. The Xenozoology series, I mean, every time I think that I need more material for Xenozoology, some new shit just rears its head. I feel like Psychology of Simping and Critique Through History. I mean, I feel like Critique Through History is probably going to end before the other 2 series will, because I mean, my Psychology of Simping, unfortunately, there's a lot of guys in like the Red Pill Manosphere community, even guys outside of it. Like when Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, and Black Conservative Perspective are getting into like Red Pill talk, like getting into like Will Smith simping. Like I have so much on Will Smith and like the Cheesecake Factory and Oyster Girl from those like horrible TikTok dates, even from my own cousin. Like I almost have shit to show from my own cousin for simping. And I looked at today's schedule and I'm like, oh shit. Like I thought it was going to be a Psychology of Simping this week. It's actually Xenozoology, but I actually did my research for this. I'm going to go deeper into that four-dimensional shit for sure, because I think that's something that, like, I saw that video about 2.5 weeks ago. Yeah, and this is another thing. Red Pill guys are forever stuck in Red Pill rage stage. And like this is something I got to be dead ass with you, bro. Like winners never quit and quitters never win. Like my perspective towards the dating game in general is one where I think guys, I understand like getting frustrated for sure, but I mean, shit, dude, it's like, what do you want this to be? I mean, like, look at other animals, bro. Like peacocks have to drag around feathers. Like, bro, you could get eaten by everything from like a tiger to an owl to like getting hit by a car. Like, you have to carry around these big ass feathers everywhere, fly around, and that's still no guarantee that you're gonna get any pussy. Like, you could go there and like wave your fans, but then like Chad Peacock comes through with his bigger fan or something, and all the females stream to him. And it's like, this is something in nature where male competition for females is just the nature of the beast. And I think that in these last couple hundred years, especially, this society and traditionally enforced monogamy has become an expectation for men. And basically, if men don't have it, they're not going to participate in society. So now you're getting a phenomenon where women are economically and financially and politically emancipated from needing a man, and the consequences of that are that like women are walking away. And unfortunately, a lot of red pill guys, the simp problem with them is not an academic pursuit like it is with me. I'm genuinely trying to understand and rehabilitate the mind of a simp because every man, as I have said in the beginning of that series, every man has simped. I don't care if you're Andrew fucking Tate. I don't care if you're Donald Trump. I don't care if you're Hugh Hefner. You have simped for a woman in the past. Every boy, man on this earth has simped for a woman. And we've all been caught simping. We've all been caught simping. At some point in our lives, we have been caught simping. And the thing is that to simp is a very no-brainer strategy for men. To give women shit for free so that they grow on you or something. But guys don't understand. If she wanted it, she would get it. I think that what most guys don't get, and this is something I'm going to get into with my next installment of Psychology of Simping, is men don't really know. I mean, this has been said a lot, but men just don't understand their worth in the dating market. They just don't get how good, how much of a catch they really are. I mean, in most scenarios, a lot of guys they see that they're brutally average, but the fact that you're even willing to give any resources to a woman is basically like she's not coming to the table with anything but her body. Like she's not coming to the table with anything because you're not entitled to sex. You're not owed sex. But you better damn well, put up some money and have a nice car and, have XYZ checked off. And I mean, shit, bro. I can honestly tell you I've never simped. I got black pill in elementary school. Fair enough, DZ. Fair enough. I know some guys that I guess they never simp. I think that it may be an overgeneralization to say everyone. I definitely simped before. I'm willing to come out here and say that I've simped. Shit, there's years I was simping, but I don't know. I think I'm just also the kind of guy that doesn't see anything wrong with just being nice to women, but at the same time, man, like this one guy said on TikTok, like you got to reciprocate. Like I'm the kind of guy who goes from like totally chill to totally fucking not chill, like instantly. Like I have no chill when it comes to disrespect. Like that's something where, luckily, my pride, although like they consider pride a vice, pride is the foundation of self-respect. If you don't have any pride in yourself, if you don't love yourself first, there's no fucking way you're going to be able to succeed or be treated right by a woman. Because if she can get away with treating you or men in general like shit, then she's going to do it. That's the sad thing about women. Is like unless they're raised right and raised to learn that like your actions have fucking consequences, then they're never going to act right towards men. They're never going to treat men with any respect whatsoever. And some women just never learn their fucking lesson. They will continue to disrespect men until their dying day, and then wonder why they're surrounded by cats on their deathbed. So shit just has me burnt. But I've already moved on to doing gym crap with AI waifus. These guys are still raging against the heavens. Get a fucking passport. Like, I'm sorry, dude. Like, we live in 2023. We live in 2020. It costs $150 fucking dollars to go get a passport. You could file unless the IRS has told you that you're behind on taxes and you haven't gotten a payment plan. There's literally no way as a U.S. citizen you shouldn't have a passport. It costs less. It costs more money to get Europa Universalis 4 with all DLC. It costs more money to get the Total War bundle than it does to get a U.S. passport, one of the strongest passports on the planet. What in the fuck are you doing? It's especially like a lot of these like white red pill guys don't know that if they went to anywhere in Latin America, they could drown in pussy. If you are white and not like Quasimodo, then you can get very attractive, decently traditional women basically anywhere in Latin America and Southeast Asia. Like I could go to the Philippines right now. I could go to South Africa right now. I could go to Colombia right now. And I could find a 8 or 9 out of 10 girl to take home with me or stay there with. And my nigga, like I've lived this. Like back when Edwin's like, remember Edwin was married, bro. That man was a dog and he was married. He went to Colombia and got married. It took a year and a half. This dude passport bro hardcore. Morality is not in their DNA. But it's like, I don't know, because the red pill, remember that the red pill is nothing but understanding the truth. And if you see the truth and you like freak out about it and you cry, and it's like, yeah, women are going to use you for food, and women are going to play games, and women are going to talk to other guys while they're talking to you, and women are going to vote for their own issues before they vote for yours. Women are self-serving. You can have these opinions, fam, but does it change fundamental reality? Like, what do you want out of life? It's like guys who want a wife and kids and the picket fence in the house. I'm like, those are things you got to work for then. Because if you really want a girlfriend, and you don't want to, be a monk and die sexless and alone, then you have to put yourself in the dating game. The question is, go where you're wanted. Go where you actually have the advantage. And for me, saving up money so that in the summer I can take a trip out to a foreign country, that to me sounds worth it. And I'm moving to Hawaii in 6 days. Like, I'm unironically going to be 1 foot in Asia by the end of this week. Like, by next Sunday, bro, I'm going to be in Hawaii. And that's why I'm not going to be streaming next week, by the way. That's going to be a heads up. I'm going to be hoping that my car is going to be there. I can actually track my car right now for you guys. So the last thing I'll do on stream is track this. But yeah, next week is Psychology of Simping. Will Smith, Oyster Girl, Dates Gone Wrong, and How to Recover from Rejection. I think that's going to be the one. That's what I really am going to cover next time, is like covering rejection. The male feminist in the track on. Oh yeah, that's right, the male feminist. I'm gonna cover the male feminist too. That's right. That's right. I have that written down. And the Sniper Wolf Sims. But I want the next one to be recovering from rejection, because a lot of guys do not know how to get rejected with grace. I think that from all the guys and all the research I've talked to, and talking with women, again, talking with women sometimes pays off, because one of the things I've noticed with women is that the thing that they're the most afraid of are guys that can't take rejection. And honestly, bro, there's times where honestly rejection just pisses a man off, because again, women play games and then think that, a guy's a dick because he gets mad or he's a nice guy. I'm like, no, you play mad fucking games with this guy and then are shocked that he gets pissed off and you finally actually reject him. Like, you should have rejected him off the bat instead of giving him your number and heeing and hawing and going on a couple dates and saying you're not feeling it. It's like, just don't waste the fucking guy's time. Within 15 seconds of meeting the guy whether you like him. And that's the kind of shit that I want. It's like, I like Kevin Samuels because he calls out women, but he also talks with women. He levels with women. He hears their problems. Most red pill guys don't fucking do that. But let me see. I was looking here. Oh yeah, I was also going to go into Reddit. Oh, the MLB guy who got found not guilty. And then there's a woman and an 11-year-old girl. I think that the 11-year-old girl was like 3 months ago, who both got arrested after faking their own kidnapping. And I was also going to respond to Matt Walsh. Like, again, because these series come out every 3 weeks, because I'm rotating them with 2 other series, I'm super late to the game with all of these that get covered by these like other channels. But I also just think these other channels, they're kind of like what I'm doing, except shorter form. They're basically just reaction channels. Matt Walsh reacts to TikTok, or it's like all of them. That's what everybody does. They just react to different shit. And that's basically what I'm going to do. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here, but I do want to give a more clinical perspective on most of these phenomena. But that's definitely something I noticed, is that dudes just cannot tolerate rejection. It's just kind of sad, but that's something definitely going to cover next time, covering rejection. But I'm going to try to find my car. So I'm going to go to marine traffic for the first time on stream in a minute. Yeah, women are scary when they can't take rejection. That is true. That's when you get straight stalker shit. I've had a stalker before. It's not fun. You think it's like a stalker, like a woman stalker especially, you're afraid of, because they'll lie on you and ruin your fucking life. Like, a female stalker will literally be like, oh, like they'll like unironically accuse you of like sexual assault or something. Like, it's not like a male stalker who just wants to be near you. A female stalker will literally try to ruin your fucking life. 19 hours. Oh, okay. So this is the ship that's currently bringing my car to Hawaii. It got its last receiver 19 hours 59 minutes ago, and it should be arriving in Honolulu on the 18th. I'm not going to Oahu, so I'm hoping that it doesn't go all the way the fuck back to California without dropping off my car where it needs to go in Kahului. But yes, your boy is leaving California for good. I am never coming back to California. Like, I swear, like, I am never coming back to this shithole. I came back here during the pandemic from Germany, like only like 6 months before it ended, like that summer where the pandemic kind of tapered off. I came back just before that, and I have absolutely fucking hated it here. Like, I just cannot fucking stay in California and where it's come. So I'm gonna go to Hawaii instead, where I know for a fact, like, oh, everybody's like, oh, Hawaii votes so blue, but not after fucking Lahaina, bro. Like, after Lahaina, nobody's fucking. I don't think many people are going to be voting Democrat in Hawaii for a minute. I think if anything, Hawaii is going to turn into a purple state. I think that there'll still be a lot of people who still vote blue, but they're going to gain a lot of Republican support, especially in the next election. So stay tuned. I think that the situation for Hawaii is fundamentally different than the shit that we're seeing for like New York, for example. Just a fucking mess. But anyway, we'll see. But I'm excited. So yeah, unfortunately, guys, again, as a result of that, I am not going to be streaming next week. I will still be uploading. But I will not be streaming. And also, the light does make me look fucking horrible, but it is way better than sitting in the dark. So I hope you like it. I'm trying my best. I'm probably going to try to upgrade my camera, but I know that hopefully I'll have a better internet connection next time. So again, thanks DZ for dropping by. Anybody else who's seeing this afterwards, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment, do your thing. I'll do mine. But yeah, guys, I guess I'll see you in a fortnight. And I don't mean the video game one. I'll see you on the 29th. I have to see how my setup's going to be. I'm going to be working on the weekdays. And that's going to be basically grueling physical labor. But yeah, see you next week, DZ. It's going to be a fun ride. Like, at least I might even start like streaming outside maybe if I have the time. But I have no idea. Like, my living situation in Hawaii might be a little cramped, but I'm still going to stream anyway. They can listen to me rant and rave and talk about, how silly it is to be trying to date women in the modern age or whatever. But psychology of simping is going to definitely take a turn more towards the men. Like, of course, I'm going to point out dating profiles, but it's basically going to be pretty male centric from now on. I'm not going to really just use this as an opportunity to just bitch about women. I really do want to help people who might be simping break out of their simping habit, because simping is a habit. It's an acclimation. Guys, instead of getting good at talking to girls and having riz, they instead just try to throw money and favors at them and treat girls like their girlfriends without actually being, expecting anything in return. We're going to see how this affects the egos of modern women next time, but the focus is definitely going to be on men and how to take rejection, the male feminist, things of that nature. So yeah, I will see you. You'll see a video from me next week, but I'll see you on the 29th, unless I'm somehow able to move into my flat, because I'll have to move on the 22nd. But yeah, I'll see you on the 29th. So yeah, guys, have a good one, and I will see you then. See you.